The stone corridor smelled of damp grain and wet soap. The bell in the small tower rang out high and long, and Sister Mora stopped carrying the jug of water, as if the sound had grabbed her by the sleeve. The monastery gates had already been thrown open, and two squires in unfamiliar colors appeared in the passageway. They carried a chest and a letter with a seal. Since that morning, a simple week of housekeeping had turned into a week of scrutiny and rumors. There were complaints that one of the nuns had broken her vow of chastity. They said it was convenient for the local knight, because right next to this sister's cell lay a narrow strip of monastery land that interfered with his plans. He claimed that the monastery did not follow the rules, and that the land would be better used for the needs of his people. The silence made the cells feel cramped. A pot was boiling in the kitchen, and conversations were whispered. Someone said that the knight had sent a memo about punishments, and that it contained harsh measures. Someone added that the abbess would not do such a thing. What began that day as what seemed to be a family quarrel over boundaries and rumors soon became a test for everyone. I am glad to see you here. I am a storyteller. Before I begin, I would like to welcome you and ask where you are watching this video from. Write in the comments where you are from, without specifying the city or province. Just share where you are with us. I hope you enjoy listening. Abbess Agafia accepted the letter. She said that it contained a complaint and a request to convene a church court. She ordered not to hide one's eyes and not to make assumptions. She opened the penitential book in the library, where the statutes, penitentials, and records of previous years were kept. The book contained clear rules: days of fasting, manual labor, reading, confession, bowing, and a ban on humiliation of the body that was not prescribed by the statutes. The sisters stood around and looked at the neat lines written in brown ink. No one saw in the book what was already being whispered around the courtyard. The complaining knight was called Roland. He had a sturdy house on a hill and a heavy gaze on people with empty pockets. He had long wanted to add a narrow strip of monastery farmland to his fields. The strip lay like a seam between his boundaries and the monastery wall. In a good year, it could yield enough grain to comfortably survive 2 weeks of winter. This was important for the monastery. Roland said that the monastery did not have a right to keep the land because secret sins were allegedly committed there. He added that his house needed bread for the people who held spears for the safety of the surrounding villages. The sister who was hinted at was named Emilia. She had been in the monastery for only 3 years. She knew how to read and write better than many. Before the monastery, she lived with her maternal aunt and copied books for the parish priest in exchange for bread and a roof over her head. She had a light hand and a steady eye. She rarely argued and did not like it when people shouted in the courtyard. When the messengers brought the chest, Emilia stood in the corner of the library hall and looked at the seal. She noticed that the impression on the wax did not match the one she had seen on the tithe collection last fall. At that time, she had been asked to enter one receipt into the inventory, and she had honestly recorded whose seal was on it. Roland's seal had a break at the edge, as if a tooth had been broken off. There was no break in the current seal. In the evening, Agafia summoned everyone who was supposed to be present at the reading. She opened the letter and said that the knight had declared a violation of his vow and requested a church trial in a week. He had sent a box with a memorandum on the penalties for such a crime so that the monastery would not deviate from the law. The abbess replied that the monastery lived by its charter, not by someone's memorandum. She said she would check the document and prepare the charter and records for the court. There was no anger in her voice. Her hands did not tremble as she held the pages. Emilia did not sleep that night. She decided to look at the memo. She asked for the key to the cabinet, where controversial papers were kept. The key was given to her by the librarian, the dry Sister Varvara, who did everything in order. Emilia unfolded the parchment and saw neat lines. The lines contained punishments that were not in the charter: physical exertion with humiliation, deprivation of food beyond the permissible days, and other measures. There were also words that sounded more like knightly speech than church speech. Emilia looked closely at the letter R. In this R, the bottom line went too deep. This was how the parish school students wrote when they were in a hurry and held the pen too steeply. They did not write like that in the monastery. They didn't write like that in the offices. She remembered that at the fair in the spring, the knight scribe had taken a sample of her handwriting for a correspondence order. He said he wanted to check the price. He asked her to write 2 paragraphs from the charter. At the time, she didn't understand why he needed it. Now it all made sense. In the morning, Emilia went to the abbess and said that the memo looked fake. She did not argue. She pointed out the details. The seal without the usual break. Letters that were not typical of the office. A term that is not used in statutes, but at the fair when talking about punishment at the will of the Lord. The order of the points, strangely close to the secular description of fines for broken fences. Agafia listened. She said she would call a notary from the city and ask him to bring a witness who had seen the seal before. She ordered the sisters to open the storeroom where the old receipts were kept. At noon, a record of last year's tithe was found. The seal did indeed have a break in it at that time. The rumor spread throughout the courtyards. Rolana's stableman came to pick up firewood, and he said in the kitchen that the owner was willing to pay for the repair of the church roof if the trial took place quickly. He said that Rolana was a respected man and that the monastery was obliged to admit its mistakes. By evening, there was another knock at the gate. A man in a gray cloak with a leather bag arrived. He introduced himself as a notary from the bishop's office. He said he had come on call and would check the letter and the memo. He did not accept food until he had examined the chest. He said the sealing wax was softer than it should be for the age indicated in the accompanying note. He said that this was a sign of a fresh impression. Meanwhile, a simple household concern turned into a shift in genre. What happened to the monastery gates was what happens to creaky doors. They became not just an entrance, but a border through which pressure passes. On the second day, a sack of grain and a short note appeared at the gate. The note said that the pious gift was intended for lamp oil. During the night, someone cut open the sack in the kitchen shed. The grain spilled out onto the threshold and beyond. A sister who got up before dawn to draw water found the tracks. They led to the side gate. There was a new lock on the gate, even though it hadn't been changed in years. Someone had put the lock on and changed the key during the night. It seemed like a minor annoyance, but it was the beginning of a domestic thriller in a quiet place. The monastery realized that it was not only letters that were putting pressure on it. On the same day, an old man from the neighboring yard approached the gate. His name was Toma, and he brought bundles of onions to the market. Many considered him a simpleton because he mixed up his accounts and often remained silent even when he needed to explain himself. He asked to be let in to see the abbess. He said he had an old boundary stone by the stream, which had always been considered the boundary between the monastery's field and Roland's field. He said that the stone had recently been turned over, and now the mark was facing the ground instead of the sun. He asked to take a look while no one was watching. He was considered an underrated person because he did not know how to speak with passionate words. But it was he who brought the first clear thing that was not lying on the shelf with papers. Agafia sent 2 sisters and a brother gardener with him, who tended the apple trees and understood where the earth held water. There was indeed a stone by the stream. A cross was carved on it. The cross was smoothed by sand, as if it had been scraped with a knife and a sharpened stick. The gardener brother said that the stone had been turned over recently. The moss on the underside was alive, its roots clinging to the damp clay. They lifted the stone and turned the sign back over. It was a small action, but it restored order. That day, Toma became not a ridiculous neighbor, but someone who saw something important at the right time. Meanwhile, the notary opened the charter and the penitential on the table. He noted that in the monastery books, punishments for breaking vows follow the rule of moderation: fasting, labor, prayer, temporary transfer to work in the infirmary, conversation with a spiritual mentor. He said that the controversial memo listed measures that the church does not prescribe in a women's monastery. He wrote this down. He asked for the paper, with Roland's seal from the previous year, to be brought to him. He checked the edges. He said that there was a break on the old seal, but not on the new one. He picked up his pen and wrote that he saw signs of forgery. In the evening, the knight's men arrived. They told the gatekeeper that they had come to take the disputed chest, as it belonged to their master. The gatekeeper replied that the chest was now part of the case and could not be handed over. The men left, but during the night, someone threw a stone at the kitchen window. There was no glass there, only stretched leather, and the blow only rolled up the edge. However, it was a sign that someone wanted to create fear. The next morning, the abbess told the sisters not to talk by the fence. She said that there would be a church trial and that they needed order, not noise. Meanwhile, Emilia looked at the edge of the controversial memo and saw that the parchment had been taken from an old shelf. She recognized the edge because she herself had cut a sheet from that stack last winter when she was rewriting the list of names of deceased benefactors. She said that 2 sheets had disappeared from that stack in the spring. She thought of the scribe Roland, who had asked for a sample of her penmanship. She told the abbess that she was willing to show a sample of her handwriting and a sample of the knight's scribe's writing, which she had happened to see on a contract for the sale of horses at the fair. She remembered 2 distinctive features: an exaggerated loop on the D and an extra tail on the T. Meanwhile, a man arrived at the monastery whom no one was expecting. He was the illegitimate son of a merchant from the city, now a city elder. His name was Oliver. He said he was passing by and heard about the dispute. He said that as a child he had lived at this monastery with his cousin for a month, and that the abbess Agafia had once helped him obtain a letter from his father acknowledging his maintenance. He said he had not forgotten how that year the monastery had given grain to his mother when they had no bread. He brought with him a scroll from the city chamber where the register of seals is kept. He said he was ready to provide a certified copy of the register where Roland's seal is indicated with a break. He became an unexpected benefactor because no one expected the city elder to intervene and bring what the monastery lacked: an official record with the city seal. He asked not to be paid anything. He said he was doing this in memory of a past debt. With this scroll, the case took a new turn. The notary attached a copy to the case file and set a date for the trial. Roland sent a reply saying that he would appear with his advisor and 2 witnesses. He added that he doubted the purity of monastic life and that the land would serve the world better if it were in the hands of those who knew how to defend it. While waiting, Emilia found a penitential in the library that was rarely opened. It was older than the others and smelled of leather and dust. In this penitential were lines very similar to those that the controversial memo tried to distort. It said that punishment for falling was not a matter for the crowd or the square, but for quiet conversation and measures that did not humiliate the body. It said that repentance heals, not cripples. Emilia placed her finger on this line to show it to the court. She knew that many who had never seen such books readily believed the terrible stories about monasteries. She understood that rumors were convenient for those who wanted to seize what belonged to others. The night before the trial, something else happened. In the hospital room, a wick left unattended caught fire. The fire caught on dry rags, and in a minute, the room was filled with smoke. The sister gasped, heard a crack, and ran out. The gardener brother, who was sleeping nearby, ran up with a bucket. He poured water on the wall, and the fire went out. A piece of rag soaked in grease was found near the transom. It burned like lamp oil but was too thick. It looked like an attempt to force the monastery into a careless act so that they could later say that it was a mess. The gardener showed the rag to the notary, who nodded silently. On the day of the trial, the gate was crowded. Roland arrived in chainmail without shoulder pads to appear as a simple master rather than a warrior, although his sword hung from his belt. With him were an advisor, a clerk, and 2 witnesses. The town elder Oliver also arrived. He brought 2 servants and a chest with registers. The bishop's vicar, who was to preside, also arrived. He sat down at a long table, and the notary took a seat next to him. Abbess Agafia stood quietly. The sisters sat along the wall. Emilia held the penitential and the receipt with the broken seal. Old Tom stood by the door, holding his cap in his hands and staring stubbornly at the floor. Roland began by saying that the monastery did not maintain purity, and that he, as a neighbor, could not tolerate the disgrace. He said he had handed over a memo with punishments so that the monastery would not break the law. He said that behind it all was concern for the peace and bread of his people. He asked the court to recognize that the monastery must cede the strip of land. The vicar nodded and asked the notary to sort through the papers. The notary carefully placed 3 items side by side: the disputed memorandum, the monastery's penitential, and the city's copy of the seal register. He said that the seal on the disputed memorandum did not match the city's record or last year's receipt. He said that the language of the memorandum did not conform to church custom. He pointed out terms that are not used in the statutes. He asked Emilia to show him the page of the penitential that mentions the measures of punishment. Emilia showed it to him. He read it and said that the monastery follows this rule because there are no records of punishments in its books that should not be there. He wrote this down. The clerk Rolana asked to speak and said that the monastery books could be forged. He said that the monastery had a vested interest. He said that there were rumors about the sisters' sin. The vicar asked if there was a witness who had seen the violation, not just heard rumors. The clerk said there was no witness. He added that he saw a strange similarity in the handwriting in the monastery records, as if one hand had written everything. Emilia looked up and understood where they were going with this. She said that in monasteries, one hand often keeps the records, which is normal. She said she could recognize the handwriting of the clerk, Roland. She asked to see the contract for the sale of horses that the clerk had posted at the fair in the spring. Oliver said he had a copy of the fair register, with a sample of the handwriting in his chest. He took out the sheet. The notary compared 2 letters, D and T. He saw the very details Emilia had mentioned. He said that the disputed note was written in the same hand as the fair contract that came out of Roland's office. Old Tom asked to be given the floor. He said that a boundary stone had been turned over by the stream. He said he saw this as an attempt to change the boundary. He said the stone had been returned. It was a short story, but it got to the heart of the matter. The court recorded it as evidence. At this point, the case became clearer, but not easier. Roland sighed heavily and said that he was still sure that the monastery was interfering with him. He said that his brother had once left his illegitimate daughter in the care of the monastery, and that this was a mistake because children should live with their families. He said that the monastery draws to itself those who should belong at home. The words sounded like a stone thrown into water. Emilia froze. She knew one secret about herself. Her mother had once worked for Roland's brother, and she did not like to remember that house. Her mother died when Emilia was little, and her aunt took her to the parish and then to the monastery. Her aunt said she had a father, but he didn't want to see her. Emilia never asked for his name. Now the pieces fell into place. The vicar looked at Oliver. He unfolded another piece of paper. It said that many years ago, Mother Agafia had received a letter in which a man acknowledged his responsibility for the child and asked for a place for her in the convent school. That man was Brother Roland. It turned out that there had once been another connection between the monastery and the house on the hill. The choice of an adult man who before his death had admitted his guilt and asked for the child to be given shelter and an education. It was a twist of hidden kinship. It did not change the essence of the land dispute, but it did change the balance of power in people's minds. The person who fueled rumors about someone else's downfall turned out to be someone whose family had asked the monastery for mercy in the past. Roland's expression changed. He said he did not recognize the document because it was old. The notary replied that the document was certified by a seal and witnesses. Oliver confirmed that there was a record in the city archives. The court took note of this. Next, the Gardner brother asked to speak. He rarely spoke, but now he said that the monastery had one more thing that few people knew about. He showed a bundle. It contained a strip of cloth with marks indicating the dates of autumn meetings. This strip was once used to mark where the shadow from the old tower fell on St. Michael's Day. The locals used this shadow to divide the water for irrigation. The shadow falls exactly on the border with Roland's field. 3 old men still alive remembered this rule. They came up and nodded. It was a simple peasant method, but it was older than the current ambitions. It was not only one person who was an underappreciated hero, but also a simple practice that everyone considered rustic. It helped the court see that the land should not be moved back and forth at someone's will. The court withdrew for a brief consultation. No one laid out unnecessary items around them. There was no abundance of books. There were a few clear papers, a boundary stone, a strip of cloth, a penitential, a receipt, and a city copy. Upon returning, the vicar said that he saw signs of forgery in the memorandum presented by Roland, that the monastery charter and penitential did not confirm the rumors of secret perversions, but on the contrary, showed moderation and order, that the boundary of the land was confirmed by old signs and witnesses. He said that the monastery would retain the land and that the memorandum was deemed invalid. He added that due to the attempted forgery and disturbing actions at the gate, Roland was obliged to make a public apology to the monastery and pay for the repair of the damaged kitchen window and new dishes for the hospital kitchen. It was a clear outcome, and it came not from miracles, but from facts and human decisions. After the trial, the courtyard felt empty. Roland's servants left without looking up. Old Tom sat down by the wall and rubbed his cap with his palms for a long time. The sisters went about their work, some to the garden, others to the infirmary, and still others to the laundry room. It seemed that everything had returned to normal, but the matter was not yet over. That evening, Emilia noticed that 2 notebooks were missing from the cupboard. They contained records of bread deliveries and donations over the past few months. They were not the main books, but they were important for memory. Emilia was alarmed. She went to the abbess and told her that the papers had disappeared. Agafia ordered her to quietly check the corners of the house without making any noise. She said that after an open trial, there are always hidden attempts to take a bite. She sent the gardener to look in the woodshed and at the well, where people sometimes hide papers to retrieve them later. An hour later, the gardener returned with a rag in his hands. In the rag were 2 notebooks tied with string. He found them behind a barrel where wood chips were stored. Emilia leafed through the pages and saw that 2 places in the book had been corrected by someone else's hand. The correction concerned the entry about the grain that had arrived at night with a short note. The correction stated that the gift had been given by a man from the house of Roland, and that he had already brought similar gifts. This created a false impression, and could later be used to fabricate a story about the monastery's dependence on the night. Emilia sat down silently at the table and rewrote the correct lines, adding the notary's mark at the bottom to confirm it. The next day, Roland himself appeared at the gate. He left his sword in its sheath and did not enter the house. He said he had come to carry out the court's decision. He said he had brought money to repair the transom and hospital utensils. He held out a bag. He said he was ready to publicly admit that the memo was not in accordance with the charter and that he had acted wrongly. He asked that this admission be recorded and read at the Sunday fair where people gather. The abbess nodded. She said that the monastery did not want anyone's misfortune and that the admission would suffice. She asked Emilia to write a short text to be read in the square. On Sunday, a crowd gathered in the square. The drums did not beat. The church bell rang steadily. The town crier read the text and announced that the knight had admitted his wrongdoing and asked the monastery for forgiveness for the false note and for the pressure he had exerted. He said that the ransom for the damage had been accepted and would go to the general needs of the hospital. People listened in silence. Then someone coughed. Rumors of secret perversions did not disappear in an instant, but they lost their power. There was no longer anything to prop them up. After all this, Emilia returned to her usual affairs, but her usual affairs had changed. She understood that her life was now connected to the house on the hill by more than a stranger's thread. She learned that Brother Rolana was the one who had once left her a path to the monastery. She did not want to stir up the past, but the facts were before her eyes. One day, an elderly woman in a headscarf came out to the garden. She said that she had once worked for Emilia's mother and knew the name of the person who had left money for her upkeep. She said the name of Roland's brother. She said that he was afraid of disgrace and therefore did everything through other people rather than directly. Emilia heard this and did not cry because tears would not change anything. She went to the library and wrote a short note to herself. She wrote that knowing her origins should not interfere with the matter at hand. Oliver stayed at the monastery for another day. He said he would check the city to see if there were any papers left related to this story, so he could close the case for good. He said the community could count on his help if doubts arose again. He asked Emilia to show him how she had distinguished the forgery by the letters. He listened attentively, as one listens in a shop when learning a new measure of weight. He said he wanted to teach this to 2 young scribes in the city administration so that they would not accept as genuine papers in which the letter T had an extra tail. Thus, hidden talent versus status became a lesson not only for the monastery, but also for the city. Meanwhile, Old Tom became a special person in the market. People approached him and asked him about stones and shadows. He discreetly showed them how to look at the moss at the base of the stones, how to understand time and measure by the shadow of the tower, how to remember where the shadow falls on St. Michael's Day. People stopped laughing at his stutters. He became the one who upheld the old order in new disputes. The underappreciated hero was no longer a figure of fun. Changes also took place in Roland's house. The advisor quietly left his post. It was said that he advised using fear rather than the law. He was replaced by a young man from the city, a notary's apprentice, who could read and did not like it when paper was bent to someone else's will. Roland began to pay closer attention to his people. He made sure that one of his servants, who liked to rummage through other people's chests, did not return to the monastery gate at night. After all the events, an internal investigation was conducted in the monastery. Not for punishment, but to strengthen order. The abbess said that rumors about secret lives should stop at the threshold, where the charter and penitential lie. She ordered that the rules be read aloud more often, so that the sisters and neighbors would have no reason to invent unnecessary stories. She ordered visits to the infirmary for those who had survived the fire and the replacement of old rags with new ones, so that no one would try to repeat the same misfortune. She installed a new lamp with a wide bowl so that the wick would not fall out. From then on, Emilia wrote down in her notebook not only bread and butter, but also how rumors arise and fade away. She wrote that rumors are convenient for those who want to quickly take what belongs to others. She noted that the Rule and the Penitential are not heavy books for the shelf, but simple measures that regulate life, just as a measuring tape regulates the length of a piece of fabric. She wrote that repentance should not be turned into a spectacle. If someone falls, they work with them quietly, without humiliation. This was the case in the book, and it was the case in life when the abbess dealt with the sisters' weaknesses. A month later, a letter arrived at the monastery from a woman in a neighboring village. She wrote that her daughter wanted to learn to write and that they were afraid of rumors. She asked to take the girl in, at least for the winter. Agafia read the letter and thought for a long time. She told Emilia that there was not enough space in the classroom, but they could make a bench for the girl in the library. She ordered feathers and ink to be prepared. Emilia smiled. She said she would teach the girl to look at letters so that she could see not only the words, but also the hands that wrote them. She said that it was important not only to read, but also to understand who was writing and why. One day, Emilia went to the stream to look at the boundary stone. The water murmured evenly. A strip of sunlight lay on the stone. The cross, which had previously been hidden, now lay on top, and the shadow of a branch lay on it. Emilia ran her finger over the stone. She thought that some things are better left alone, untouched by dirty hands. She remembered the day she saw the extra tail on the letter T, and thought that sometimes it is not a sword or a cry that saves you, but an eye that does not like falsehood. Some time later, Roland sent a cart with wooden planks to the monastery. He wrote that they were for repairing the old barn, which had been sagging for a long time. He did not ask for thanks. He did not write beautiful words. He simply did what anyone who lives near a community should do. No one sang his praises. The boards were unloaded from the cart, and their quantity, thickness, and length were noted in the acceptance list. Soon, the town began collecting grain in case of a poor harvest. Oliver asked the monastery to give up part of its harvest for the common storehouses, promising to issue receipts. The monastery agreed, as long as it did not harm the hospital. The receipts were issued on good paper. The seal bore the same break that had once helped stop the forgery. Emilia checked the break line and smiled with professional satisfaction. She did not like loud stories, but she liked it when the mark was in place. Life returned to its usual routine. For the feast of the Holy Apostles, thick soup with roots and a handful of grains was cooked in the kitchen. In the evening, the sisters dried laundry in the yard. In the library, there was the steady rustle of pens. In the hospital room, they rearranged the benches to make the passage wider and put up a new shelf for herbs. It was all simple, but that's what life is made of. When the wind picked up in winter, the neighbor kids started coming into the yard to ask for boiling water for their hot water bottles. They were given some. They were given a piece of dried apple. And no one remembered those weeks of tension because the house was warm. But in the library, there was a notebook that Emilia had kept. It contained the main things that kept the monastery going: rules instead of rumors, penance instead of myths, boundary stones instead of other people's will, the shadow of the tower instead of voices, the city seal instead of fancy words, the quiet voice of the abbess instead of noise. And there was also a little note saying that sometimes in arguments, it's not the rich or the loud who win, but those who see and don't look away. Rumors of secret perversions eventually began to sound like a bad story that people repeat out of habit, but don't believe themselves. At fairs, there were people who said that once upon a time, terrible things were found at a neighboring monastery of the same kind. Then someone would reply that the monastery's books described simple punishments, that bodies were not mutilated, that punishments were imposed for correction, not for spectacle. And that was the end of the conversation. Emilia aged slowly. Her hand remained steady. Her writing had few embellishments and no unnecessary flourishes. A girl from a neighboring village learned to read and write. She could distinguish between letters and, like her teacher, could see where the hand was honest and where it was lying. One spring day, Emilia saw Roland in the city. He was walking slowly, without an entourage. He stopped on the bridge and looked into the water. He noticed her and nodded. He did not approach her or start talking about the past. He just nodded, as people do when they have understood something important in their lives and now cherish it in silence. The story, which began with a small family quarrel and a stranger's note, ended with everyone getting their just deserts. The monastery kept its land. The lie about punishment crumbled like old sealing wax in the heat. An unexpected benefactor arrived in time and provided the document without which the case could have been closed. The copyist's hidden talent became a shield stronger than any fence. The underestimated neighbor showed the boundary stone and thus restored clarity to the people. The hidden family connection did not become a reason for blackmail, but a quiet reminder that the guilt of one had once been redeemed by the care of others. And if anyone wants to redraw someone else's border, come up with terrible punishments again, or bring a sack of grain at night again to then talk about dependencies, there is now a bundle of things at the gate of this monastery that are difficult to get around. A stone with a cross on top, the shadow of the tower falling where it should, the charter that is opened in public, the penitential, which clearly states that the body is not broken for the sake of spectacle, and a notebook with even lines where there is always room for accurate notes. These things keep order better than any shouting. Thus ended the story, in which punishment did not become humiliation, repentance did not become rumor, and justice grew not from anger, but from consistency. It did not come by chance. People made it happen through their choices and actions, and therein lies its power.